Hello, everyone. I'm Kelly Eversole, one of the founders of the Women in Genomics, and we're very pleased to have today a presentation on presentation skills for Brainiacs. Laura Foley, who is a presentation strategist at Laura M. Foley Design, creates presentations that drive business results and close sales. She develops and designs presentations, conducts presentation and webinar audits, and provides skills training to transform people into confident communicators. She's helped clients at MIT, General Dynamics, Nestle, and Harvard Business School to, as she says, cheat death by PowerPoint. She's a graduate of Massachusetts College of Art and Design and has over 25 years experience in presentation design, marketing, and copywriting. And as for an introduction to Laura, I think one of the things that we all deal with is, have we ever struggled to explain very complicated processes or ideas to people outside our field? And this is really true in science. Often people fail to understand how what we're saying relates to them, and when it seems, particularly when it seems so clear and obvious to us. Do you have trouble designing slides that inspire people to act? If you answered yes to these questions, you're in the right webinar. Laura has been helping STEM professionals to become better presenters since 2009. In this session, Laura is going to teach you skills you can start to use right away. Your remote and in-person presentations will be more interesting, informative, and inspiring. So today's webinar is co-sponsored by Eversole Associates, Women in the Enterprise of Science and Technology, better known as WEST, the International Wheat Genome Sequencing Consortium, and the Phytobiomes Alliance. On your webinar dashboard, you will find a copy of a presentation for Brainiacs cheat sheet that Laura will mention today. And you will also be able to see a place for you to put your questions. We'll have a couple of spots for questions during the presentation, and we'll break for those. So be sure and put your questions in as they come to mind. And then also we will have a few polls and would encourage you to do that throughout the webinar. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Laura Foley. Laura, it's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much, Kelly. I appreciate that fine introduction. Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from today. As Kelly said, it can sometimes be a struggle for a scientist to convey vital information to non-scientists in a way that they understand or that they can act on. The purpose of today's webinar is to give you some tools to overcome those obstacles and become more clear communicators, more persuasive communicators, and be able to get your messages out. As Kelly mentioned, there will be some viewer polls, so that will be your chance to answer some questions. Also, we're going to be taking 2 Q&A breaks during the presentation. If I say something that you want further clarification on, or if I haven't answered a question, please do enter them in the Q&A section of the screen, and Kelly will read them to me as we go. In a webinar, it can be very difficult to engage with your audience because I can't see you and you can't speak to me. But it's my hope that through the polls and the breaks, the question and answer breaks, we'll be able to overcome those obstacles. Now let's begin. Wouldn't it be great if everybody already knew what a genius you are, everyone already knew that you have vital information for them, and they already knew why what you're about to say is important. And wouldn't it be great if you never, ever, ever had to worry about funding or selling anything? It would be wonderful if we had truckloads of money at our disposal. However, what usually happens is it's more like this, right? We are presenting, we're looking for funding maybe, we're looking for support and validation, we're trying to communicate important ideas, but sometimes it's a struggle. But we need to make these presentations in order for that to happen. Whether or not you enjoy doing it, being able to successfully communicate your ideas, share your knowledge, try to be persuasive is something that we need to do. It's a skill that's important to develop. And in order to communicate with a broad audience, we do find ourselves needing to present. Today at this webinar, you're going to learn how to create informative, clear, entertaining presentations that you can deliver either virtually or in person that drive the results you want. Now, why is it that we present in general? There are 4 general reasons why we present, and one is to teach. Maybe you are a professor and you are teaching students. Maybe you are teaching a general audience. You're imparting knowledge to somebody. Another reason that we present is to sell. And that would be, of course, if you are trying to monetize a product or a service that you have developed, or if you are perhaps trying to sell the idea of something to somebody. So you're trying to convince somebody to buy something from you or get something from you. We present to inspire. Think about TED Talks, people who are able to make even the driest seeming data the most important and vital thing you've ever heard about. That's another reason why we present, to make people feel excited or to motivate them. And we also present to convince. I know that one of my clients often, every year, in fact, goes to Capitol Hill and does science presentations to legislators to help convince them that things like the National Institute of Science is a good thing to keep on funding. And when we're trying to convince somebody to do something, either to start an action or stop an action, we need to make sure that we're talking in a language that they can understand. I am sure this is not your attitude when you go into a meeting, when you launch into a remote presentation. We don't love doing boring presentations. I don't know any scientist who wants to be boring, but unfortunately, that's what happens. So let's explore for a minute why a scientific presentation might be boring. Basically, it's because you have lots of information and the audience needs to know everything about your subject so that they can make informed decisions on what you're presenting, right? All of our information is important. We want the audience to be as informed as possible. And sometimes our subjects are so complex that we have to go into these vast backstories to explain where we are present day. Sound familiar? The result of needing to pack presentations full of information is that you get slides that look like this. Right now it is zipping through the clicks, but in fact, this is a slide that has 11 click sequences. We have slides that look like this, or this, and these. Data dumps. This is making people drink from the fire hose, giving them so much information that it's a problem. The problems are that data dumps are confusing. especially to an audience outside your field. And when people are confused, when they are faced with lots of choices, lots of data, lots of information, often they do nothing. It's paralyzing. If you have 10 choices that are your options, are you going to immediately be able to make one of them? No. And just having too much information can shut people down. And it's boring. If you have a lot of information in your presentations, you often have lots of bullet points or lots of little paragraphs, or maybe you've got diagrams that are very, very complicated or involved. If you're not in that field, if you are a general audience member, or even if you're educated in a different field, all that information can be boring. And here's another thing that I've seen a lot in scientific presentations: no call to action. A call to action is a marketing term that is basically the directions that you are giving to your audience of what to do next. You're not asking them to fund your venture. You are not asking them to change their behavior because of whatever reason. Being very specific helps the audience to understand what to do with your information. We're going to go over my 6 rules for great presentations to help you understand how to structure a presentation so that people will generally understand it and people will be motivated and inspired by your presentation. First, we're going to talk about highlighting benefits over features. And by the way, I'm going to go through these 6 rules briefly now and then go into them later in depth. You're going to learn how focusing on the audience and not yourself can be beneficial. You're going to learn about telling stories and doing demonstrations. You're going to learn about the benefits of planning your presentations. You're going to learn about editing all the extra stuff out that doesn't need to be there. And you're going to find out what a difference energy, enthusiasm, and excitement can make when you're presenting. Starting out with highlighting benefits, not features. Features are a laundry list of items. They are attributes, they are descriptors. And benefits, on the other hand, are the good things that come from the attributes that you're describing. Audiences typically care more about benefits than features. If you are presenting to a peer group, then it's all about features because you need to scientifically justify what you're talking about. But if you are presenting to sell, to persuade, or to convince, it's the benefits that's going to make the difference. Now let me introduce you to this charming fellow. This is a fellow I call Mr. Skeptic. And Mr. Skeptic is a member of your audience, could be several members of your audience, and the questions on his mind are, so what and what's in it for me? These are very blunt questions, but they're valid. The problem is, a lot of times, nobody articulates these questions for us. So as presenters, we don't often focus on these 2 questions that your audience is asking. He wants to know how what you're talking about will help him directly. And this is one of the tools that I use to help to clarify what these benefits are. It is called the Bluff Statement. Bluff is bottom line up front. What that means is you articulate exactly what your audience is going to get from your presentation. You touch upon the content of your presentation, but you also focus on the positive outcomes, the benefits of sticking it through to the end. You want to put this statement up front at the beginning of your presentation so that people know what they're in for, what they signed up for, and why they are there. The benefits that you offer, the good things that come from being in your presentations or your webinars should not be a punchline at the very end, because that can feel like you're wasting people's time. If they don't know why they're there exactly and they find out at the end, then that can be a problem. You might recognize this slide from a couple of minutes ago. This is the Bluff Statement. These are the benefits that you're going to get. You're going to drive the results you want. You're learning how to create these informative, clear, and entertaining presentations. I'm not telling you everything that you're going to learn. I'm just hinting at it. And now, this is your opportunity to wake up and interact with me. This is a time for a viewer poll. I'm going to read the question. Kelly will open up the poll for 20 seconds and then show the results of the poll. The question is the Bluff Statement why you're here? Are you here today to learn how to create informative, clear, and entertaining virtual and in-person presentations that drive the result you want? Kelly, if you could put the poll up, I'd appreciate that. You remember this poll is open for only a brief time, so please make your decision and we'll take a look at the results in a moment. All right, poll is closed. Oh, good. 99% of you are here to learn what I have to teach, and 1% of you is not here to learn what I have to teach. And that is okay. Because something that the Bluff Statement does is it helps people to quickly assess whether or not they should be there. And it gives them a polite way to get up and leave if it's an in-person presentation, or to sign out if it's a virtual presentation. You don't want people to waste their time, and it's no fun teaching or speaking to an audience that doesn't want to be there. That is the value of the Bluff Statement, reinforcing what you have to offer and giving people a chance to bail if that's not what they're actually seeking from you. Let's compare and contrast features versus benefits, because the distinction is so important. Features, laundry list of attributes, qualifiers of what something is. How much does something weigh? What does it look like? How does it smell? What does it taste like? What does it feel like? All of these things are features. Benefits are what things provide. The benefit of something that is smaller could be that it saves space or that you can have more of it. And the benefits are what you really want to emphasize when you're talking about something like a new procedure that you have developed or a new discovery that you have made. Why should people care? Because of the benefits. This is a picture, an illustration of what someone would look like if you just talked about features. Again, if you're doing a peer presentation, then it is all about the features, the data, the work that you've done. But if you're doing one of those sales, inspiring, or convincing kinds of presentations, you don't want to focus too much on the features because that's dull. Benefits. Benefits tie in with the emotions of using the thing that you're talking about, of doing the things that you're talking about, of availing yourself of the service, of changing their habits, whatever it is. The benefits speak to the emotional center of an audience, and that is what drives the behaviors that you want the audience to take. Remember, this guy is always here. What's in it for me? These questions are so valuable to figuring out what your benefits are. Because when you have a feature, if you keep asking, so what? What's in it for me? By the time you have asked those two questions enough, you will come down to what the actual benefit is of a particular feature. And it can really help you to drive your message home with your generalized audiences. Remember, these benefits over features is for your persuasive kinds of presentations. You're selling, you are inspiring, or you're convincing. If it is a peer-to-peer presentation, or if you are doing a dissertation, or you are defending a thesis, then you have to concentrate on features so people understand that you have a mastery of your subject. But in some cases, you can employ some of the features versus benefits fight into a peer presentation, because your peers are people too, right? And they do respond to emotional cues like everybody else. Here's an example. I know that mainly this is not a pharmaceutical audience, but I wanted to take an example of a magazine ad that any of us might have seen. And right now, we are focusing on the features of Claritin, the active ingredient, the purpose, the uses. But that's not really what people are going to pick Claritin over some other formula is. The actual ad speaks of the benefits. The benefits of using Claritin for this young lady are that she can have a cat even though she suffers from extreme cat allergies. She is happy because she has her beloved pet, and that's a benefit of Claritin. So active ingredients, boring, happy pet owner, emotional, positive benefit. Here's another one, Tylenol PM. The features are that Tylenol PM relieves minor aches and pains while helping you fall asleep and is non-habit forming when used as directed. Gee, that's great. But if you really want people to choose it, what are the benefits? We give you a better night. You're a better you all day. That speaks to the picture. She's able to have fun with her kid because she's not conking out all day long because she was up all night tossing and turning. Although the features are important, it's the benefits that really speak to the experience of using this medicine. Next, I wanted to touch on what it's like to focus on your audience and not on yourself. Because when we give a presentation, it can seem like we're the star. For instance, right here, right now, I'm on camera. I don't see any of you in the audience, and I am the only one speaking. Therefore, I must be so bloody important that there's no way you can tear your eyes off me, right? And it's easy to fall into that trap for those reasons. When we're giving an in-person presentation, we can think that we're the star because we're in front of a crowd, we're in front of a room full of people, and they are all quiet while we are doing all the talking. That is a trap that is easy to fall into, and the problem of that is this. I'm going to show you an example of a tech consulting presentation. This is based on an actual presentation. And when we join our Intrepid presentation, we have here it's called client presentation, right? So we're not even acknowledging the name of the client or in any way. We've got our tech consultants company name down here in case you missed it the first time. We've got our tagline right there, and we've got what we do. So far, the presentation is entirely about us, the tech consultants. Let's introduce ourselves. Here's your amazing team. We've got Joe, Fatima, we've got Troy, and we've got other delivery associates. Okay, so we're still introducing ourselves. Here's our amazing headquarters, which is so totally unlike anything in any office park you have ever been in. So we've got our tech consultants logo here because we paid a lot of money for our logo and it's great. So we want everyone to know about it, right? Now this goes on, unfortunately. Right now, what we have here is a bunch of slides, and it's all about tech consultants. Who we are, what we do, capabilities, approach, industry focus, services, us, 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 us. And the problem with that is that in this particular case, there are 15 slides of self-congratulatory introduction before we even address the audience. The reason that's a problem, and you could probably imagine this happening to you, is that if you are in a conversation, say, and you're meeting someone for the first time, if you are undergoing a 10-minute monologue about all of the other person's capabilities, strengths, experiences, etc., that doesn't leave a lot of room for you, right? And it doesn't make you feel like an equal partner in the conversation when a presenter is talking primarily about his or her skills. Remember, we need to consider the audience, the specific audience. Why are they here? What do they want? What problems are we solving? What problems do they have that they don't know they have yet that we can educate them on and, oh, by the way, help them solve them? These are the kinds of considerations that we need to take to ensure that our audience knows that they are a partner of ours rather than someone who is just there to listen to our voices. If it wasn't obvious from everything I've just said, the real star of your presentation is not you, it is the audience that you are addressing. And it is so important to remember that. Next, we're going to talk about the power in demonstrations, in telling stories, and in evoking mental images for your audience. Stories are relatable and memorable. Demonstrations with actual products, with props, etc., are much more memorable than simply slides on a screen. It is now time for our next two polls, and I'm going to introduce it by talking about a story called The Three Little Pigs. This might be a story that you remember from when you were a little kid, and I want you to answer this poll question. Kelly, would you please put the poll up and give 20 seconds on the clock? How much do you remember about the story of the Three Little Pigs? Please take a moment and answer the questions for us. Some of you might not be familiar with the story or never heard it. That's okay. All responses are valid and will certainly help move the conversation along. We should be about wrapping up now. All right, it looks like 38% of the participants remember the whole story, about the same amount can recall a little bit of it, and a few of you don't remember it, and a few of you have never heard the story. That's okay, because the next question will help to illuminate what I'm about to talk about. For those of you who remember the entire story, start to finish, could you please enter in the poll, when was the last time you heard or read the story of the Three Little Pigs? Kelly, if you could put the poll up, thank you very much. And we'll get 20 seconds on the clock. Usually, when I am asking this question, I'll be able to interact with people by show of hands or speaking with them. But because of the limitations of a GoToMeeting webinar, I've used this polling so that you can see what the interactive capabilities can be. Okay, Kelly, that is time. If you could please put up the results. Let's see. So 17% of you recently heard or read it. So maybe those are people who have children who have children in their lives somehow, or maybe they like the story and wanted to revisit it. And then 21% between 1 and 10 years ago, they heard it, but they remember the entire thing. What I want to point out is that almost half, 40% of those who said that they remembered the entire story heard it over 10 years ago. Kelly, could I please have the control back? So here's a story for little kids that many people haven't heard for 10 years, yet they remember the whole story. That should speak to you about how powerful storytelling can be in helping us to visualize concepts, helping us put ourselves into the story, and how it's easier to recall a story than it is to recall data points, bullet points, tables, and charts. I'm going to be quiet for a moment so you can absorb the majesty of this slide. This is a slide from a presentation of a researcher who was developing a kind of eyewear that would help people who had low vision. The slide design is very text heavy, bullet points, and we've got a little blobby clip art guy who just happens to be vision impaired. I am going to guess that these words partnered with that clip art don't evoke an emotional response. Who cares what happens to blobby clip art guy, right? To overcome that, how about this? We've just pulled out one of those data points. Instead of having it being navigating and shopping is a bullet point, it's difficult to navigate and shop. And now we have a photograph. This is a photograph of someone squinting. He's at a pharmacy and he can't read any of the labels because they're all blurry. Having a photograph is a powerful enough tool that you can use. But if you were able to make a story out of a case study, out of an interview, or out of some kind of combination of different stories that you know or have heard of, then you can tell the story of, let's call him Alan. And you talk about how Alan used to be a vibrant member of the community, used to be in a lot of clubs, used to drive here and there. And now Alan is unable to drive. He has trouble finding the right things that he needs. And now you could talk about what are his struggles? He has to rely on other people. Maybe he's more withdrawn. Maybe he's less active. Any of those things could form a compelling story, and the audience will respond by thinking, wow, that's just like my dad. Or I have a friend who's doing that exact same thing. So rather than have a bullet point, now we have a friend, a loved one who is experiencing that. Even if the audience doesn't know an Alan or someone like him, they can appreciate his struggle because the audience can't see clearly because everything is a blur in the background. Demonstrations can be very memorable. Allow me to screen for a minute. I'm going to do as good a live demonstration as I can. Let me introduce it by saying that the reason why there's a photograph of a woman with gauze on her face is because she is blindfolded, but not completely. And she can barely see through that, but she can see shapes. If you are in a live presentation situation, giving someone the experience of low vision or whatever it is that you're presenting about can drive home your message very powerfully. And here's another way that you can do it. Right now, this is something I would let an audience member wear, but I'm going to let you experience. If you look at my screen, you can see I'm still here, but it's very blurry. And the reason it's blurry is because I made these, let's see, these are cataract goggles made just with shop goggles that I put clear nail polish on and tapped some tissue on to leave a mess behind. But when you wear them, it gives you the effect of having cataracts. Live demonstrations really help sell your message. But how do you sell the message of genomics? You can't necessarily pull a DNA strand out of something and say, see what I mean? Fortunately, there are lots of online resources that you can use. And one that I found very quickly was genome.gov. Right here in the middle here, you can see that there is this is an origami DNA that you can actually build yourself. There are physical experiments that you can perform. There are online games. And some of you might be thinking, well, that's just for little kids. Spoiler alert, grown-ups like to play too. And sometimes being playful is a very effective way of teaching concepts that could be unfamiliar or complicated. All right, I have been doing all the talking so far, and now it's time to answer any questions that you might have. So Kelly, has anybody asked any questions that I might be able to help them out with at this point?
Yes, we do have some questions that are coming in.
Already?
So the first one is, and you've just started to touch on it because you brought up the term genomics. In a scientific presentation, the methods are extremely important, how someone did their experiments.
Yes.
Yet the benefits about that are difficult to explain to someone and to give them that understanding. So how do you emphasize the benefits when you're talking about methods?
That's an excellent question, and it would really depend on your audience. If you're presenting about finding, say, you could talk about the implications that your work might have into the general population, curing a disease, increasing crop yields, lessening the effects of X outside influence on Y, the thing you're talking about. When you're doing those scientific presentations and showing your data and showing your work, the benefits do have to take a back seat because you do need to prove your work, show your steps, and demonstrate that you have a complete mastery of the subject. Coming up with benefits for a presentation like that might seem difficult, but there is always a reason you're doing the work. It might be pure science, and the reason is that you are trying to add to the human knowledge of your subject. Or you might actually have developed something that has a lot of benefits within the genomics community that wouldn't make any sense to someone outside of that. Maybe you've developed a new way to catalog something, or a more efficient process of doing a job that is tedious. Those are benefits that people would certainly recognize. This process isn't as dull and tedious. I get my results faster, therefore I can analyze more samples. So that could be a way to extrapolate benefits from what otherwise might be a purely scientific presentation.
So just to continue on to that line of thinking, when we prepare scientific journal articles, we often try to tell stories, and over the past 15, 20 years, there's been almost an encouragement of putting that kind of data, hardcore methods, hardcore data, in supplementals. Do you think that that's kind of the way we should think about it when we're making presentations? To try to put the supplementals and other kinds of information packets, particularly when we're talking to either general scientific communities, people who are not in your discipline, but certainly to the lay community.
That's an excellent question, and it's something that comes up a lot of if I am just focusing on benefits, or if I'm trying to simplify slides by removing data, how will people know what the data are? How will people be able to find my sources? In these cases, having the sources available either in an appendix at the end of your presentation. So if people are asking very specifically, how did you derive this result? You go, well, here on slide 132, you can see blah, blah, blah. And you have that data at your fingertips to display if you're called upon. Another way around it is to have a presentation that focuses on big picture items or have some level of complexity to them, but not what you would give to a peer, and then have handouts that reinforce the more scientific, robust nature of what you're talking about instead of all of the emotional benefits kinds of things that you would use to inspire a live audience.
Yeah, so even for those of us who give talks to our peers and maybe giving a genomics talk to genomics scientists, we often do put those slides in that have a ton of data that no one can read.
Right.
And we even say that during our presentation, you can't read this, but let me tell you what it's saying. So in that instance, you're basically saying, let's don't put that in the slide, put the concept on the slide, perhaps in a more visual way, and then provide that information elsewhere. Maybe that's a reference to a published article or a preprint or something like that, right? Is that more the point?
Yes, the slide presentation is not meant exactly to be as if you'd written a brochure or a paper and published everything on the paper on the slide. The presentation is usually meant to interest people in finding out more or to give people enough information to act. But yes, having that information available is very important so that you're not just blabbing, that you have the data, you have the work, you've done the research, and you can show your work. Okay, at this time, we're going to continue. We have another 5-minute break coming up for Q&A, and then we'll have time at the end of the presentation to address any questions that weren't addressed yet. Let's talk about planning. Planning presentations is a very important thing because you need to, once you have figured out what you want your outcomes to be, what your presentation goal is, the presentation plan helps you to get there. The planning stage helps you to narrow down your focus so that you are presenting on your key messages and you are avoiding tangents that, while they might be interesting, distract from your key message or detract from your mission of achieving whatever goal your presentation has. My kids hate this meme because it's almost as old as they are, but it is very true that one does not simply do a PowerPoint. We have to, for a good presentation, we need to make that plan so that we have a roadmap of creating the eventual slides. And it all starts with an outline. An outline helps you to list all the ideas that you have in a format such as a Word document, Google document, sticky notes, whatever way you like to plan. And it's a non-committal format. By that, I mean, if you type a bunch of words and then you decide, that's too much information, you can delete the words and it's not a big deal. On the other hand, if you had developed a presentation, spent time designing charts and slides and looked up photographs and then decided, that's not what I wanted to have at all, then that's a lot of work to toss away. Now, an outline is how you should organize things. The outline I have here about awesome sandwiches, again, I know I am dealing with a highly scientific and educated crowd, but I figured sandwiches have a universality to them that would help to talk about the outline process. Let's say I've decided that I don't want to talk about the ingredients. If I have a outline, boop, there it goes, it's gone. All I've done is I've typed 6 lines and now they're gone, so there's not a big time investment. On the other hand, if I want to highlight how easy sandwiches are to make before where they come from, then I can simply choose this block of text, move it up here, and then my presentation flows in the way that I want it to flow. What you should not do is to start your presentation in PowerPoint. Because when we start with our slides and then figure out the backfill all the talking points afterwards, then it can tempt you to start working on the visuals of the slide before you have their messaging. So you end up with slides like this, lots of bullet points, teeny tiny picture. Easy to fall into that trap when you're using PowerPoint. Also, you want to try to present just one idea, one single idea per slide. Sometimes it's complicated to do that in a scientific presentation when ideas are intermingled, but you can build on ideas by having several slides. Having one main idea per slide will help your audience to more clearly understand what you're talking about. All of that stuff from the outline, it doesn't go as bullet points on your slide. All of that stuff goes in your speaker notes. So you know what you're going to talk about, and then the slide itself can just have a picture of what you're talking about. This might look like a smile face, but in fact, it is a petri dish with some very well-placed bacteria blooms. Anyway, whatever it is, all of your speaking notes are from your outline so that you know what you're going to say. And what's on the slide is the visual information, the simple graphic, the photograph, the couple words or lines of text that will help to define what you are talking about. Speaking of lines of text, editing is so important to cut out things that don't belong in your presentation. And my favorite editing process is analyze and synthesize. And it is very simple. First, we analyze a slide to figure out what the main messages are. In this case, the main message is describing Arches National Park. And here, straight from our friends at Wikipedia, is the first paragraph on the article about Arches National Park. Once we've determined the main messages of the slide, and there can be several messages in a single slide, we synthesize it into a new slide that incorporates photography. So now we have a picture of Arches National Park, and we just have a description, Arches National Park. So this would be an introductory slide. And then if I wanted to go on and talk about the more than 2,000 natural sandstone arches, then maybe I'd have a lot of pictures on this slide, 9 pictures of all the different kinds of arches and so forth. So analyze and synthesize means pulling important information out of your slide and figuring out more visual, simpler ways to portray it so that what you're saying is more easily understood at a glance and more understandable by a broader audience. Here's another slide from an actual presentation. And this was a man who was introducing himself as a cybersecurity expert. And in case you didn't know, he's got all his titles, his background. And to ask an audience to read all this is just silly, because some people won't read it. Some people will try to read it and not be able to read fast enough, or some people will read it and not pay attention to the speaker anymore. And when I analyze and synthesize, and this takes a little while, so I'll just give you the shortcut. What I realized is that he has all of this experience, but the one thing that is really impressive about his experience is that he used to be a hacker, and now he is not. And that is how he knows so much about cybersecurity, is by breaking into systems to hack them. This very clearly shows what all of those credentials did not. You might have seen slides like this, where someone is just densely packing their slides full of information and then reading to you. That is so boring as an audience member. I'm sure you have been in an audience where this kind of thing has happened. And it's it's because he has too much information. He hasn't edited out the important things. To get to the gist of what we're talking about, the kernel of your presentation, it's important to be simple without being simplistic. And what that means is that if you have a general audience, remember, this isn't necessarily for a peer group, but where you're trying to sell, you're trying to persuade, you're trying to convince, is that your goal is to explain yourself in a way that anybody can understand and that they can tell other people what they learned. A really powerful baseline is if you can explain to your grandmother what it is you do, and then she can turn around to members of her community and say, oh, my granddaughter is so great. She studies blah, 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 and she has found XYZ results. Then that is a simple explanation of your work. You've probably heard this about 1,000,000 times, that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and it's really true. You saw the difference between having a description of Arches National Park and having a photograph of it. Here's an example of a different kind of slide. It's a description of something, and you might be reading it right now while trying to pay attention to me. Maybe you're blowing it off. Maybe you're getting hungry. Whatever it is, I want you to have an immediate understanding of what this is. And that's where the picture comes in. These are nori rolls. And now all of this information that was in the slide ahead of time, that goes into the speaker notes so that I can address all of those things and teach you everything you need to know about nori rolls. If you're wondering, say, Laura, where do I get all those free photos? You can download photos for free, copyright free and cost free from the links in the handout that are in this GoToMeeting. So don't forget to download that handout for that great resource. Finally, we're going to talk about the way you present, of the energy, enthusiasm, and excitement you bring to your presentations. Here's the opposite. But fortunately for this lady, she has some very subtle visual cues that she can note to gauge gauge how well the audience is reacting to her words. One gentleman's head has hit the table and the other guy is visibly yawning. So we can very quickly tell that she needs to pick up the pace, needs to talk about something that this audience might find more interesting, or somehow make a change. On the other hand, if she is giving a boring remote presentation, that can be problematic. Her audience could be logged in and playing video games. She doesn't know. She's hoping that they're listening, but hope is not a method. We have to work in order to gain that engagement, to work with our audience, to help them to understand us by making them an active participant. When we're doing this kind of thing, when we're trying to only really on your remote presentations, you need to learn the platform you're delivering on. GoToWebinar has a vastly different toolbox for interactivity than Zoom, than Microsoft Teams, than Google Hangouts, or Google Meets, whatever they're calling it these days. They're all different. And you need to take the time to work with your host or to work with your meeting engineer to figure out how you can work to bring the audience into the presentation. Using your voice can be very important. You might notice that I have varied the speed of my voice, the pitch, where I'm high, I'm low, how quickly I'm speaking, how slowly I'm speaking. This is a lot more entertaining than just using a monotone like this, because this is very boring. Your voice will help you to convey that energy, the excitement, the enthusiasm that you want people to understand from you when you are presenting. But remember to pause. If you are asking people to consider something, if you are asking people to think about something, you need to give them time to do it. Presenters like these give science a great name. On the left, we've got the cast of outrageous acts of science, where actual real scientists view YouTube footage of outlandish looking claims, and they talk about the veracity of what is on the video. Dan Huo and Kate Tice are the live commentators, or were on a particular SpaceX mission, and they humanize the data and help regular people who are watching the show how to understand what's going on. When you act enthusiastic, you'll be enthusiastic. And really, it's one of those cases of fake it till you make it, of teaching people how, of being an enthusiastic presenter in order to bring that energy to your presentations. Now, I thought I'd show you a couple of those makeovers of those slides that I showed you earlier, so that you can see what the difference is when you employ these principles. Again, this slide has 11 clicks to it. It's got a background that speaks of DNA sequencing, but it is just overwhelmingly green. To fix it, I gave it a background, and this is a common theme that you can get from Microsoft Office. I have changed the image by using Smart Art so that it is less gangly and all over the place and more centralized. And I have reduced the number of clicks and moved the instructions, or the explanations rather, so that they no longer obscure the data. This one. You'd be lucky if you can read that text against these little this genetics clip art here. It is hard to read. And we're asking our viewers to look at what they see in here, and then to go to A, to B, to C, to D, and we're asking them to do that 4 times. If we rearrange the data, we remove all of the extra text, so analyze and synthesize, and we present the data differently. We put the numbers in big block letters next to what people should be able to see if they have normal color vision, and they can't see a number on example C. Same thing. So visually you can see what people can see or what they can't. Tables are problematic because you're asking people to read something from top to bottom and come up with conclusions. People don't often have a lot of time for that. Another problem with this table is that this plus, which usually is positive or something good, is deleterious, which means something that is not good, it is bad. We've got this negative sign here, which is often negative, bad, but now it means neutral. So the person who designed this slide assigned the wrong properties to these common symbols. Rather than use symbols, I redesigned the slide, again, a common template that you can find in Microsoft PowerPoint. And instead of using symbols, I use colors, because red means danger, stop, warning. And the gray is neutral. Now when we look at the table, it's overall different, and we can tell what is deleterious and what is neutral. Finally, on these 2 slides, we're asked to make a comparison, but we're looking at 2 different slides, so it's harder to do that. Again, using my old buddy Smart Art, I've put the 2 types of structures on the same page, on the same slide, so that you can more easily compare them. And if you wanted, you could also include the text, but having it an easy animation coming in, so it's not all there all at once. We've covered a lot of ground today. You've learned about the 6 rules of great presentations. You've seen some slide makeovers, and you've seen some of the ways that we can make our online and in-person presentations more interactive. You learned about creating informative, clear, and entertaining presentations that you can give virtually or in person that drive the results you want. Remember, there is a handout, a cheat sheet of all the most important facts that you've learned today, plus those links to the free photos. And that is in the handouts section of the GoToWebinar control panel. And I hope that I have given you some of the tools that you need to cheat death by PowerPoint. Back to you, Kelly.
Thank you very much, Laura. This has been extremely informative, and I have to apologize for asking more questions than I was supposed to in the first break, so we went over a little bit.
Don't worry about it.
We do have some other questions, and in fact, a comment, a tip that someone uses that I'd like to add. Kathy Gustafson has said that she often adds a lot of detail about what she wants the audience to know and understand about a particular slide in the notes, so that if someone needs to, they can refer to the slide deck in the future and they understand the point that was being made. And obviously that's when you're giving handouts, but that's really a great way of providing that additional detail, at least in my opinion. What do you think about that?
PowerPoint has got so much hidden functionality, it's insane. And I can't speak to what the experience might be with Google Slides, because PowerPoint is really the thing I use the most. But you can set up a notes master so that not only are all your speaker notes in there, but you can add more things to it and treat it like a page. So that when you publish your notes, you are actually publishing more of a booklet or a PDF file that can be indexable or searchable, that has tons more information than you would want to show on screen. You were talking earlier about an eye chart kind of slide where, oh, you can't understand this, so let me just tell you what you're doing, what you're looking at. You can put that eye chart slide in the notes and annotate it as if it were a slide, but it's in the notes view. And it's all the same file, but people don't see that. You can create a handout with the notes, and that can be very helpful for people to refer to.
So that leads to the next question from one of our participants who said that they normally do not put any text in the slides and speak through concepts, but they've received feedback from peers that without the text, the audience could miss the key points. So again, how do you balance that?
That reminds me of a scene from Silicon Valley where the graphic designer was talking to one of the main characters about how they were going to market the product. And he had come up with this vision board and this soundscape, and he was burning incense to evoke a feeling that someone who was buying a server might want to feel, which was completely ridiculous, but extreme. And it does speak to a slide deck that might use lots of pictures and no text, because that can seem fluffy. It can seem like there's no data behind it, or that the person is just too, I don't know, name your superlative to include all that data. It helps to focus an audience's attention if you can put some words on there, or an image, a photograph, or a graphic that describes what you're talking about. If you are telling a story like the one about Alan, the guy with low vision, then you can put up just that picture of Alan in front of the blurry pharmacy shelf and talk about it, because a story is pictures that you have in your imagination as well as the words that you're hearing. When it comes, though, to proving points, demonstrating equations, for example, or doing something that requires more of an intellectual concentration of your audience, then you do want to give them information to look at, data to look at, or words to follow, so that they can follow along in the process. Not necessarily all at the same time or on the same slide, but maybe sequentially in a series of slides or a series of animations, so that you're bringing people through the thought process rather than relying completely on a description of it.
Well, what you're describing really means you have to take time to prepare your presentation. In fact,
oh yeah,
many of us, we do the first time, particularly, I give a lot of talks that might be similar over time. And what I have found that I do, and have to unfortunately have a good team like Isabel Kogan, who is handling some of this today, who reminds me that I'm adding too many words. And it's because, I'll think, oh, with this audience, I need to throw this bullet in. With this one, I need to add this one. And then all of a sudden, I've got a really messy presentation. But part of that is not taking the time to really think it through visually of what you're doing for that particular audience. One of the other questions that came up in here is, and this goes back to one of your slides, can you re-explain the slide simple but not simplistic? Can you re-explain that concept?
Yes. I often think of my grandmother, my own grandmother, and I would tell her, I'm a graphic designer. And I may as well have been speaking Aramaic to her. She had no idea what a graphic designer was, why it was important, what the mechanics of graphic design is. She had absolutely no idea. So she would ask me a lot, what do I do? And then I would start to say, well, you know how you have that magazine that you like? A graphic designer makes that magazine look like that so that you can read it more easily. Oh, okay. I did not explain her well. There is a branch of art called commercial art, and part of that is graphic design, and a subset of that is presentation design. It's boring, and it's just, it can seem pedantic, or the explanation can seem overly simple. The simple versus simplistic is if you're talking to a kindergartner, and simple is something that is memorable and repeatable. And it does take time to get to simplicity. It's not as simple as it looks.
Yeah, I think that's really a challenge for those of us who really like details and whose concepts and everything are based on details. And in fact, I wish I'd met you, Laura, before my mother passed, because maybe I would have finally been able to explain to her what it is that I do in a way that she would understand it better. All right, so now I have a kind of a technical question. What do you include in a presentation when you are showing the research that you have done for your PhD? In other words, you're doing your thesis defense. What is the balance for those kinds of presentations?
I suppose it would rely heavily on the parameters that are set by the occasion. So if you have, if the professor says that your presentation is only supposed to be, let's just go to an extreme. You have 10 minutes to defend your years-long research and body of work. Then you're not going to spend 90% of that time citing your sources. You're going to be focusing on highlights. The sources are important, absolutely. And it's vital that they be searchable. And what I mean is you don't say, oh, I read this in Lancet, or according to the Wall Street Journal, blah, blah, blah. You would actually have somewhere in your presentation, Wall Street Journal, October 3rd, 1952, page whatever, article, author, really easy for someone to find it and corroborate what you're saying. That's where a handout can be very useful, especially a PDF handout, because then you can link to that source if it's available online. But
Yeah.
absolutely, when you are giving a robust scientific presentation like that, you need to have sources at the ready. But depending on how much time you have to present or how valuable it is to your audience that you show your sources, that can really be a gauge of how much you show people what your sources are.
Well, certainly if you're doing your PhD defense or your thesis defense, you have a thesis, so hopefully the committee has actually read your thesis, and so you don't necessarily have to put everything in, but of course you may be giving it to an audience that's broader than your committee. So I think just really trying to learn to balance that is the main thing. So let me see if there's any. Yes. So the last one, which is actually extremely important for not only for genomic scientists, but for many of us in complicated science fields, is how do you engage people or partners who are skeptic about genomics and related topics in improving people's lives?
Head on. If you know what specific arguments they have, let's give me an example of something that people would struggle to accept genomics as an answer for. Do you have any example that you could think of?
Not in the, yeah, you could certainly say it's not really in genomics, but more if you get into the biotechnology and you say we've got genetically modified or genetically engineered food. That's a good example. And so how do you deal with something like that?
Depending on the subject, it could be easy or extremely complicated. And on the GMO argument, people aren't opposed to it necessarily because they are opposed to science. They might be opposed to it because they're thinking about robot food or weird unnatural things that they are eating, or somehow messing with nature and making the food impure or somehow less good than it would be if humans hadn't had a touch in it. And another emotional argument might be COVID vaccinations. People aren't basing whether or not they get a vaccine because of the science and their proven results. They are basing their opinions often on what they hear on TV, read in the papers, their political party, their leaders, community leaders. They're not doing the research because they just hear the big message from someone they trust, and that's the thing they go with. So it's very hard to completely change someone's opinion from one thing to another, especially with one presentation. But speaking about the benefits and addressing the fears directly without being insulting, that's the tightrope. So getting back to the less inflammatory, maybe, of GMO foods, if I was trying to convince people that an apple, a genetically modified apple, had very similar or maybe superior attributes to a non-GMO apple, I might hold two of them up and ask people if they knew which one was which, and demonstrate by visual that it's not easy to tell them apart, and then address each one of the pushbacks one by one. Okay, why do people think that this is scary food? Why do people think they're eating chemicals? Again, logical explanations don't always hit home, but the benefits and the emotions can sometimes get people to even consider another option other than black, white, yes, no.
Well, that certainly gets to the issue of not trying to portray to your audience that they should just trust you.
Oh, no.
But you're a scientist, you know.
Yeah, the audience needs to be a partner, and they need concrete evidence of why you are credible and how what you're saying could help them, either by following your advice or stopping doing something, starting doing something, whatever it is. It's kind of like dealing with children. And I don't mean this to be insulting, but with a kid, you don't say, because I'm the mom, I said so. And they go, oh, yeah, okay, yeah, we'll do it that way. No, I've got two teenagers. Because I'm the mom is the absolute last argument I will bring up for them. And it's the same with an audience. Give them reasons to come to the conclusions you'd like them to reach.
Right, great. Well, we have run out of time today, but again, I want to thank you, Laura, for a fascinating webinar. And I think that it will be really useful for many of my colleagues and peers. And just want to remind everyone that the webinar was recorded and it will be available on the Women in Genomics YouTube channel. So people will be able to review it and look at it again. And don't hesitate for the audience and anyone you know who needs help to reach out to Laura, and she can help you personally. So thank you very much for your time today, Laura, and for our participants for being here and asking good questions. So thank you and have a wonderful day.
Well, thank you. The pleasure was all mine. Thanks for this opportunity.